If you clicked on this video, you probably don't need to be convinced of all the benefits and the weight savings of the saddle, but maybe you're just checking this thing out for the first time, or you've tried saddle hunting in the past and just haven't been able to get super dialed in your comfort. Well, I'm somebody that does a ton of all day sits in the rut from the saddle, and I'm gonna walk through some of the things that I do to reach an ideal level of comfort. The only thing that I ask of you is you please like this video, as it helps me out a ton. The things we discuss are gonna be the same regardless of whatever saddle manufacturer and model that you use. This is the one that I use. This is the Method 2 from Latitude Outdoors. I found it to be a great balance of being compact, but still have a lot of comfort in the tree. But regardless of which one you use, all of them share in common the ability to adjust certain things that allow you to fit the saddle to your body type regardless of your size and weight. Really quickly though, I'd love to know what saddle you're currently running, as well as how long you've been saddle hunting down below in the comments. Outside of the adjustments on the saddle itself, the other thing that I would recommend is a quality pair of knee pads. And this is something I definitely would not skimp on. There's plenty of cheap options out there, but they either don't have enough padding or they slip out of place, rendering them useless. Latitude just launched an updated pair of their knee pads with double the padding. They have this articulating grip top, so it's gonna keep it in place and not slide down your knee. And then this giant rubberized cap is gonna keep those knee pads in place when you're leaning against the tree. So I highly recommend them, and I'll link to those down below in the description. So now we have our saddle on, and the first key to being comfortable in your saddle is to actually practice. Practice setting up, practice the process of climbing, practice shooting out of the saddle, practice just sitting in the saddle. But the beautiful thing is you don't have to practice 30 feet up. You're gonna get 90% of the benefit setting up right at ground height and practicing all of the things right there. So once you get some repetitions in, learn how to do things properly, you can start working your way up the tree. But until you really learn to trust your gear, trust your ropes, I would encourage you to start right at ground level, and it's gonna help you build the proper mechanics to doing this thing, and eventually it's just gonna be second nature to you. So with that out of the way, the first step of actually setting up to be as comfortable as possible, it starts with your platform. And I like a slight downward angle regardless of what platform you're using. And I found that angle to give your feet the most relief. But what you wanna avoid is having too much of an angle. So that way, if you did need to step up and put all of your weight onto the platform, or if you wanted to turn around and take an offside shot, you want to have that ability. So just a slight downward angle. You can get away with just perfectly level, but just a little bit down is going to give you a good foundation to build the most comfortable saddle setup possible. Once your platform is set, the next step is to attach your tether to the tree. And I always set up my tether while I'm still on my top stick, so that way I can be clipped into my bridge before I transfer from my stick onto the platform. So I reach up there. It doesn't matter too much, but generally I reach above my head just slightly and hook up my tether, and I'll adjust that once I actually step onto the platform. So the next adjustment before we clip into our tether is our bridge length. And on the Method 2 saddle, I walk with my bridge tightened all the way down just to help me be as compact as possible as I'm hiking into my spot. So I'm gonna loosen this. And one thing about bridge length that I've learned is that once you figure out what you like, it's not something that you constantly have to play with. I always go to about the same length, and it's good no matter what tree I'm in generally, and it's not something that I play with a lot. So I go about 3/4 of the length of my bridge. 2/3 to 3/4 of your total bridge length is probably pretty good. And then what that changes, or what that affects, is the longer your bridge, it changes the angle of your hips basically. So the longer bridge you have, it's gonna hug your hips less than if you have it tight. If you have a really tight bridge, it's gonna hug your hips more and you're gonna feel more pressure. So it's all about finding that balance, feeling secure, and getting that perfect amount of hug on your hips. So I have mine set, and then the next step would be to clip into my tether. So now that my bridge length is set, I'm gonna clip into my tether, and as I step onto my platform, I'm gonna move my tether to be right about chin height as I'm standing up on the platform, because as I lean into the saddle, I'm gonna drop down just slightly, and I like my tether height to be somewhere nose, mouth level. So I'm gonna step up, or I'm gonna clip in, step up, and that's right about chin level. I'm gonna tighten that up. And this honestly feels pretty good for me right here. But what the tether height does is if you raise your tether height, the angle changes. It's all about angles. But the higher the tether is, the more weight that I'm feeling in my butt. I'm supporting more of the weight into the actual saddle versus if you have a really low tether, I'm feeling more of the weight in my feet. So it's all about trying to find that Goldilocks just right, not too high, not too low. And again, I like it to be face chin height. So right here feels really good for me. It's about equal weight distributed into the saddle and then into my feet. I could sit like this for a really long time and I'm ready to hunt. So once I reach a comfortable height, I usually loosen my belt just slightly. It's like undoing your belt after Thanksgiving dinner. It's just gonna let everything breathe a little bit better, and it makes it a lot more enjoyable to sit up there in the saddle. The last main adjustment you can make is to change where this bridge is connected to your bridge loops. And on the Latitude saddles, they have these Prusik knots on each side that allow you to essentially slide them up or down depending on where you're feeling the pressure to give you equal weight distribution. And just like the bridge length, this right here, at least on the Latitude saddles, is gonna lock into place. So it's not something that you have to adjust every single time you hit the tree. Once you kind of figure out what you like, you can just lock those into place, those knots tighten down, and unless you wanna move them, they're gonna be in the same position from the last time that you set up. So figure out what you like, and you're just gonna be able to go right back to it. But what happens is, if you put those loops towards the bottom, it's gonna cup your butt a lot more. A lot more of that weight is gonna be in the bottom of the saddle, regardless of if it's a single panel or a double panel. And then say you want more of the weight to be up here in your upper back, you slide those loops up to the top. And I don't think most people are all the way up or down. Most people are probably right in the middle. I'm a shade low, but basically right in the middle. And I'm feeling equal weight distribution in my butt and in my lower back here. So right here, I am super comfortable. And this is how I'm gonna set up 95% of the time. Now, the other thing to consider is if you're a sitter or a leaner. This is what I would consider a leaning position. This is what I would consider a sitting position, where you're resting your knees against the tree. Some people exclusively do one or the other. I alternate between the two of them. So typically if I'm waiting for the action to happen, or if it's an all-day sit and I'm waiting midday, I do a lot of sitting because it kind of takes the weight off your feet, allows you, it's a good resting position. And then I like to be more in a leaning position when the action's happening because I feel like I can turn and move a lot better. I'm a little more stealthy, deadly that way. You might have to adjust your tether height if you're sitting versus leaning. You might need to adjust where that pressure is cupping your butt or your back, depending on if you're sitting or leaning. This setup that I have right now, I can honestly alternate pretty well between the two. What you'll find sometimes is if you keep a low tether when you lean like this, and then you go to alternate, sometimes the angle of your legs will be a little bit too extreme and you might have to actually raise your tether a little bit to comfortably sit. But these are all things that you figure out over time. And this is why I encourage you to not wait until season to start figuring some of this stuff out. There really is no right or wrong with any of this stuff. And my biggest encouragement to you would be to not give up if you're struggling to get comfortable. Please DM me on Instagram or leave me a comment down below. I would love to help you out if you're struggling or if you have other saddle related questions. Saddle hunting is an awesome tool to have in your tool belt, and so many people miss out on it because they're simply not willing to get over the initial learning curve, which in my opinion really isn't even that steep, especially with all the resources out there nowadays. What I'm gonna do is pin a comment down below with all these shortcuts listed out so you guys can screenshot it and then reference it when you're out there in the field. But to run through the order of operations to get as comfortable as possible, first, you want the pitch of your platform to be slightly down. You want your tether height to be somewhere between chin and forehead level. You want your bridge length to be 2/3 to 3/4 of the total length of your bridge. You want your bridge to connect to your bridge loops, somewhere right in the middle, maybe a shade down in my situation. You want some high quality knee pads. And then one thing I haven't touched on is if you don't have a 2-panel saddle, you probably want to consider getting a back band to support your back on some of those longer hunts. Make sure you subscribe to my channel as I have a ton of saddle related content, and check out these 2 videos right here if you really want to level up your saddle hunting game.